Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
I was commissioned to write a dictionary of contemporary design, which was going to be 200,000 words long, have 1,000 pages, and be extraordinarily comprehensive. But about a year into the contract, I had a phone call from Stephen McGrath, the editor at Penguin, who said, "Dan, people don't buy dictionaries anymore. They've been exploded by the digital revolution. What are we going to do?" So we thought about it, and in the end, what we've come up with is B is for Bauhaus, a title which is slightly misleading in that it's not actually that much about the Bauhaus. The first item is A is for authentic. Exhibit A is a possibly Korean-era American Army parka. Now, I wear this to really embarrass my family. They back away and say, "What are you doing? Are you trying to pretend that back in West London where you grew up, you were once a mod with a scooter?" In fact, I wasn't. It's not nostalgia. But what actually attracted me is the idea of authenticity. Somehow this gives the impression of being a garment which was designed without being designed. So it's about function. It's got this fantastic tassel on the zip, which itself is a wonder of brass construction, designed so that you could actually open and close it in sub-zero conditions. The sleeves are held in place by webbing and buttons. It is apparently authentic. And yet, of course, it's the kind of thing which designers love, because they love to fake authenticity with extraordinary attention to detail. The chapter also looks at how typography addresses the same issue. And those of you who are graphic designers in the audience will immediately recognize the font here as Gotham, a font which was designed in the 1980s as a font by Frere Jones for an American magazine called Esquire, which, as he puts it, is trying to evoke the great period of anonymous design in America, the period of the Hoover Dam, the period of FDR, the time when a font could reflect sober honesty and straightforwardness. Of course, now it's carefully contrived by graphic designers, and it was used by Obama in his first election campaign, because though he wanted to kind of present the aura of the New Deal, he couldn't actually afford it, except in his posters. So B is for Bauhaus, of course. For me, a fascinating exploration of the myth of a city which, when the Bauhaus moved to Dessau, it was a city of 80,000 people, and yet for 5 years it could be seen as the world's capital of design. To run such an ambitious educational program in a city of 80,000 people would now seem impossible. What is it that's become so different about the world, in which more and more ideas concentrate in fewer and fewer places? It's also a fascinating moment in that one reflects also, typographically speaking, that in the days when the Bauhaus was flourishing, its typographers went out of their way to insist on using a lowercase b for Bauhaus. Otto Leiker, who went on to found the Ulm Hochschule, once memorably suggested that if only the Germans had been more resistant to capital letters, they might also resist fascism slightly more effectively. Maybe a view of how design, from some points of view, especially from graphic design, can be said to be looking at the world through a letterbox. B is for Blueprint. A reflection, I suppose, on how magazines can impact on the way that design is discussed. Blueprint was started in 1983 by a collective, cooperative of designers, architects, critics, photographers. And as is often the way, iconoclasm in critical moments comes when one generation tries to supplant their predecessors. So in our day, in the 1980s, we were trying to kill off the sacred cows in those days, the Hugh Cassins of this world, by championing another generation who were somehow going to change the way that the world saw design. And of course, the subtext is that as we champion a new generation, so we critics rise with our creations. And of course, now the survivors of that generation wait pitifully to be dispatched by our successors in electronic haikus, 140 characters at a time. Or, of course, if we're sharp enough, we try and dispatch our discoveries as well and find a new lot to champion. Critical design, in many ways, I think is the most fascinating. This chapter was triggered by my coming across the work of Dunn and Raby, a pair of very interesting professors at the Royal College of Art who run the Interaction studio. And the thinking here was triggered around the idea of an object they'd made, which they call the huggable atomic mushroom, which at first sight is a very soft woolen Ottoman stool, which, when you look at it very closely, takes the form of a mushroom cloud with a stalk and a toadstool. It's the sort of thing that W.B. Yeats had a better name for, A Terrible Beauty is Born. On the one hand, it's actually an object which asks to be taken as a piece of furniture, but actually, in the hands of Dunn and Raby, it's an example of critical design, an object which is asking us to understand design from a very different point of view. Is design about asking questions, or is it about offering solutions? For Dunn and Raby, it is certainly that sense of asking us to consider technology, understanding that design is not only that naivety of trying to manipulate us into buying things, stimulating our want glands, it's also trying to look at the questions of what design might be about. Now, it is actually a long-term tradition in British design. In my days as a journalist, one of the most hostile postbags that I ever had was when I reviewed Fiona McCarthy's excellent biography of William Morris, who, among other things, refused to set foot inside the Great Exhibition in 1851 when he was taken there by his mother as a birthday treat, on the basis that he knew that everything inside it would be meretricious, machine-made junk. And yet, somehow, he's also seen as being the father of modern design. And for a long time, I really found it quite hard to really get a handle on Morris. On the one hand, he was a revolutionary socialist. On the other hand, he was also a man who longed to design beautiful wallpaper, a combination that's beyond parody, one might say. He was a man who made his living by, as he put it, pandering to the swinish luxury of the rich, words he actually used in the presence of one of his clients. And yet he was also a dedicated anti-colonialist and a believer in the rights of women. He was someone who wanted to give working people honestly made products, and yet by his rejection of machinery, he made it impossible for those people to afford them. So on the one hand, is he a failure as a designer? On the other hand, is he actually offering something more, looking beyond the surface of what design might be?